92.7, 95.1 FM, The Light. The following is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are those of the sponsor and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio 1, WPSC AM 1320, 92.7 FM, 95.1 FM, The Light, and its management. And now, to address the legal concerns of our community, AM 1310, The Light presents Legally Speaking. Here is today's host. All right, Dr. Ewell.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Especially, my hearts go out to all the friends and family in Indianapolis. We've had a terrible tragedy on Thursday night near midnight. We had a mass shooting incident here in Indianapolis. It was our third mass shooting in the last month and a half. In the United States of America, in the last 30 days, in the last 16 days, there have been 30 mass shootings in America. And I want to just talk about that before I talk about my superstar panels. We're going to have our usual superstar panel, John Sweeney, famous lawyer in LA, who represented people that developed widespread corruptions in the LA Sheriff Department, Vanita Banks, a crack research analyst, and Milton Grimes. But before I get started with my superstar panel, I want to go over real quickly what has happened here in our city for all the people here in Indianapolis that regularly listen to our show. We have deep sorrow today. Because we've had 3 mass shootings here in Indianapolis, which is unprecedented. And because we've had so many of these mass shootings, so many senseless lives lost, and just not the 8 people that were killed. We had a number of people, at least 8 or more people were shot and severely injured because of this shooting. One of my clients I was talking to, his vehicle got shot a total of 12 times. So apparently the shooter was using some type of automatic weapons. The police department is slow in giving the details out. I've made a couple calls, but eventually, hopefully we have the information by Monday at the latest. But I want to go over one thing that's really relevant to this whole process. In 2018, we had about 326 million people in the United States of America. We had 393 million guns. In the whole world, civilians have 857 million guns. United States have 393 million. So the United States of America, in terms of guns, we have 43% of all the guns owned by civilians in the whole world. We're less than 3% of the world population, but we have 43% of the guns. So my concern is, we now know that it was a deranged 19-year-old Caucasian or white male from Kokomo who apparently came because he had some mental process and just randomly started murdering people here in Indianapolis. Shameful. It's something that we have to deal with, but we need to hold our elected officials accountable. The people in Congress have failed to pass responsible gun control legislation. That's something that we need to look at very carefully, particularly as it relates to disease process. We've had the NRA been big advocates of protection of Second Amendment rights. I need to tell you that if America, 120% more people in this country have guns than the population, that we need to have a Second Amendment common sense legislation to prevent people with mental diseases and things like that from owning guns. We have too many guns now. But the odd thing about it, everybody I talked to said the same thing. I'm going out and buying me a gun. So the mass killing has prompted more people to want to buy more guns. And so this insanity is never going to stop. Now, I'm a big Second Amendment fan, by the way, and I think that there's nothing wrong with responsible people owning guns. But we have to somehow come up with some legislation that prevent people who are mentally deranged from owning guns. And that's my thought process for today. Now, having said that, we'll get back to the trial of the century with our superstar panel. With John Sweeney and Attorney Banks. Okay, you guys made a prediction. Now, what was that prediction and what happened?
Well, I raised a question last week as to whether or not Chauvin would take the stand. And Milton made a bet with me And I stated that I would never bet against Milton nor John Sweeney on this question. And so predictably, we saw Chauvin exercise his Fifth Amendment right and decline to take the stand. John and Milton?
Well, John Sweeney, there was something unusual about that, though. They didn't just say, we're going to not testify. It was a strange process, the way they presented that. And, I've not seen it done that way. But what I did is that once you comment on this, I'll tell you about this rebuttal evidence rule that I looked up on Minnesota. I didn't realize that Minnesota rebuttal evidence rule was so strict until I read the rule today. But go ahead, John.
No, I agree with you. His invoking his Fifth Amendment right was very staged. It was what they were trying to accomplish was to let the public know, or make the public believe that I really wanted to take the stand, and I was tossing and turning, and maybe my lawyer advised me not to, but he wanted to let the public know that I really wanted to take the stand. I really wanted to tell my story. I wanted to tell, quote, the truth of what happened out there. And he knows in the deep pits of his heart that he was never going to take the stand. This case was all about raising a reasonable doubt. See, the prosecution has to prove someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high standard. The jury instructions in California say that you have to have an abiding conviction in the truth of the charges. In other words, you have to have a lasting, you have to believe that the person is guilty before you vote guilty, and the belief has to last not 5 minutes, not 5 days, not 5 years, not 5 decades. It is an abiding conviction. And that's a very, very high burden. It's the highest burden in the law, burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt. So, with that said, that is the typical. When I was practicing criminal law many years ago, and I started out, the DA's office, and I did all kinds of criminal cases, including death penalty murder cases. The favorite go-to strategy is to raise a reasonable doubt. And that's what this defense was based on. That is that the reasonable doubt was that these, number one, these were legal tactics that Chauvin employed, that any person who was healthy could have withstood them, but it was George Floyd, because of his health, his poor heart, the drugs in his system, habitual drug user, he killed himself. That's the reasonable doubt, and that's the defense, and it was extremely predictable because it's used 98% of the time in these cases.
What I want to discuss briefly is a key evidentiary ruling. The defense expert, without evidence, without scientific proof, introduced into the case the probability that the decedent died because of carbon monoxide poisoning. Nothing was contained in the autopsy report. No scientific data was raised. Nobody testified even that the vehicle initially was even on. And no time during the trial did that become an issue. But yet their expert was allowed to testify as to this crazy theory. And then the prosecutor then attempted to rebut it with their expert. And the judge threatened a mistrial. And I was thinking, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because that's the purpose of rebuttal evidence. When somebody introduces some evidence in, you have an opportunity to defeat that testimony by offering contradictory evidence that deal with that specific issue. However, Minnesota, when I looked at their evidentiary rule, their evidentiary rule is one of the toughest one I've seen in terms of rebuttal evidence. Their rebuttal evidence rule requires that once the defense tender their expert, and their experts requires that the person actually disclose a report, right? And then the defense, once they do that, then the prosecutor then within 30 days have to then disclose their rebuttal expert on the same issue. So their discovery rules are the broadest, most expensive one that I've seen. Illinois has a rule on the 213 F3, but this rule here is goes slightly beyond that on rebuttal evidence. Now, before I get back to my expert, producer, let's talk to one of the callers. I see our phone is lit up today, and so go ahead. We'll take the first caller. Go ahead. Okay, we lost both callers. Okay, they can call back. The first two. Now,
Attorney Lee?
Yes.
On that issue of the toxicology report and the threatened mistrial there at the end before the attorneys, both the prosecution and defense, rested their case, there was this assertion that the toxicology report had not been provided to the defense. And my question was, as I watched that whole scenario unfolding, whether or not the prosecution actually knew what the rules were in this case and intentionally offered the result of that report to plant the seed in the jury's mind, even though they were instructed not to consider the evidence. But it's kind of like you can't, once it's already out there, the jury's already heard it. What do you trial lawyers think?
Well, in this case here, though, what was clear to me, though, I think that was a misnomer because they did provide the autopsy report, and the autopsy report became public record, right? If you look at their database, the autopsy report was provided, and in the report, when I looked at it, it said the toxicology report was pending, which is typical, right? Because once they do the blood samples and things like that, then it goes to a secondary lab, and then usually within 2 to 4 weeks, the results of the lab studies are made known. So when you're doing the case, if I'm defending someone, I would simply contact the coroner's office or the lab to get a copy of the report. And I thought that wasn't that big of a deal because if they had an expert witness who was planning to testify about what a person's blood level was, at a minimum, their expert should have asked for the report himself. And that's what blew my mind. I'm thinking, there's one thing in terms of what disclosure is. The other thing is that the basis of 702 expert testimony. Any expert that's credible, that's going to give an expert opinion on a toxicology result, at a minimum, would have requested a copy report. And that's why I was thinking, this has got to be the dumbest thing I've ever seen. I didn't understand it. I'm thinking that I don't think there's a question about whether or not the lawyers concealed that. Remember, their expert under this trial rule in Minnesota is required to disclose their report. And so I'm thinking it's sort of like an expert giving a report and basing an opinion on something that clearly is not evidence. And therefore, I would have moved to strike his entire testimony because it's not based on the scientific principle. As lawyers, we had this case came down called Daubert many years ago, and it became sacrosanct, and a lot of states adopted a portion of Daubert. But here, Minnesota goes a little bit further on their 702, an expert witness testimony. And that's, now, before you answer that, let's go back to the line because we have these callers back on the line. Okay, caller, you have a question for us today, our expert panel. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Lee.
Yes, sir.
I got a question for you. If the people have witnesses thing on video, and you had the witnesses that were standing on the sidewalk that observed all aspects of what went down. How is the defense lawyer? I know he's supposed to be defending his client, but how is he going to repudiate all of the witnesses and all of the things that was on videotape that he did to say that it never happened?
Oh, my panel, you guys want to tackle that? You said you had all those witnesses seeing this. Now the defense lawyers say, don't believe what these people in the video, your lying eyes, but believe us. I guess that's what he's saying, right? Go ahead.
First of all, the defense lawyer's job is to defend his client and raise the defense, no matter how ridiculous it sounds. Welcome to the world of criminal advocacy. I've seen far more comical defenses than the defense that was proffered in the Chauvin case. So what the caller needs to realize is this is an adversarial system, and each side is trying to win. And the more ridiculous the defense sounds and the tactics used by the defense lawyer, usually that means that they have a weak case and they're trying to do anything, throw anything against the wall and see if it sticks. So don't feel offended. Don't feel shocked and surprised. This goes on all the time and has been going on all the time in the United States, and any adversarial system. It's up to, that's why you have a jury. That's why you have two sides, and a reasonable jury can see through all of this, hopefully.
Attorney Banks?
The defense has an obligation to represent his client to the fullest extent of the law and zealously. And their burden is to create a reasonable doubt. So as predicted, they threw everything up against the wall. They're saying this is a very simple case. It's not complicated. You've got the video, the 9 minutes, 29 seconds that we all saw around the world. Very unusual case in that aspect. Very simple. You have the officer, and then there were, 6 other officers there. I did note the fact that one officer who was standing across the street was, in fact, called to testify. We had mentioned whether that would be the case last week during the show. But so the defense has thrown everything against the wall. They have stated that there may be other factors, such as heart disease, such as drugs in his system, such as the narrowing of the arteries, such as even carbon monoxide from the police car exhaust. Throwing all of that against the wall with the hope that one juror will decide that those other factors make the death, as the defense's expert witness stated, cause of death to be, quote, undetermined. What do you think?
Well, there's something I concur with both my experts. There's one thing too before we have a bunch of callers, but one thing I need to point out to America. The defense, if you have a unanimous verdict, they're trying to get one person to get a hung jury. This is a very, very expensive trial. I know what experts like Dr. Tobin charges per hour. You know, when he was expert in our case, it's $1,000 an hour, $10,000 a day, and they had that guy for 2 days and a couple of days prep. So that one witness probably cost them at least $40,000 to $45,000 to testify, right? But here's the thing: in America, we saw an election where one person lost the election by 7.1 million popular votes, but yet over 70% of Republican voters felt that he had won. Now, this is very important. If you could throw something up against the wall and over what amount to 50 million people think that the election got stolen. 50 million people. And so no matter how bizarre the evidence is, you can sometimes convince one or more person that it's true. And so that's a perfect example. If you think outside the box and look at what's going on in American society, you can see that no matter how bizarre a story is, we now have people that believe it, unfortunately. Now let's go to our caller. Okay, Brother Imhotep, you have a question or comment for us today. Hello?
Let's see, can you hear me? Oh, Brother Nate.
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you
Go
hear me?
ahead. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. Hello to you, Jeff, and everyone. I just want to throw this out there to you guys. That Guardian report that came out the last couple of days with all the U.S. police and politicians that donated money to Kyle Rittenhouse. There's got to be, the politicians, you're right, got to be held accountable. Because the only reason why these factions are able to do stupid things and do stuff like that and these unjust murders is because of the politicians and the government are allowing it. So I want you guys' opinion on that and how damning that is. When we look at people that call in and talk about, niggas don't resist, and we have 20 videos of people resisting that are white and that are not killed. But that damning report about the police supporting Kyle Rittenhouse and politicians, what does that say about really the fabric of this country and how huge it is? Thank you.
Attorney Banks, you heard the comment?
I did. I saw that this morning, that as a result of a security breach, it was revealed that many police officers and officials across the country have contributed to the defense of Kyle Rittenhouse. And before this information was revealed, we saw that he had raised, or that GoFundMe effort had resulted in hundreds of thousands of dollars raised for his defense. And I think this just goes back to the division in this nation that Attorney Lee just referenced. You have, this is a very, very united country, and very disunited on issues like this, where a gentleman can walk down the street with an assault rifle, kill 2 citizens, and yet prior to that, you've got the police officer shooting Jacob Blake in the back. What was it, 16 or at least 8 times? Let me say that. I want to be factual in my comments on the show. And so that contrast is stark, and I think reflective of the state of disunity that exists here in America.
Attorney Sweeney?
Yeah, I didn't quite get the question. There was an echo on my system, and I didn't quite get the question. But
well, what he said is that there is a proliferation of the politicians, police officers that gave money, for example, to Kyle Rittenhouse, the guy that shot and murdered those people during the protest. And apparently they're encouraging this terrorist type act. And he was getting a comment as to how does that affect America in general when you have these leaders in our community that are advocating violence towards minorities and people that do peaceful protests.
Well, it all comes back to our recurring theme that we've talked about for over years: racism in America. White people are treated differently. The criminal justice system is different for a black person and a white person. I mean, we witnessed this, like you said, this guy had just killed some people, was walking down the street, raised his hands up, but had a gun an AR-15 slung over his shoulder. They just passed him right on by. Whereas a kid in Chicago the other week had a gun. It was thrown down. They gave him commands to show us your hands, and that's what he did. They shot him dead. You know, so if you just, I mean, subconsciously, when you see a person of color, that person is treated differently. It's as simple as that. And let me go back a couple of questions ago where you talked about the Second Amendment, and you believed in it, and you understand that the Constitution was drafted in the 18th century, and there had just been a revolution where guns were needed to overthrow British tyranny. There were not a whole lot of people in the country back then. Guns were used for militias, for hunting. It's a much different place almost 300 years later, a much different place. And guns are being abused. You have a segment of society that says, "Oh, what about the Second Amendment? I want my guns." Well, the ones who have abused the guns, the ones who have made living in America a nightmare for a lot of communities, have ruined it for the people who are, you know, legitimate, like yourself, Nathaniel, like myself, believers in the Second Amendment. You have to strike a balance. Things have changed, and you just go right across the border in Canada to the north. You'll see where they don't have guns. The murder rate and the crime rate is much different, just a mile away across the border. So I know that was off the question of the gentleman who called, but yeah, I think that politicians and I mean, it's a difficult mix of things to correct when the basis is racism. So I mean, you know, this I mean, this guy who did the shooting there in Wisconsin or Michigan, I think he was from Wisconsin, but it happened in Michigan or vice versa. His defense GoFundMe page got a lot of hits, and there was a lot of money, just like Dylan Roof in South Carolina, the shooter of Mother Emanuel Church. He had raised all this money for his defense. And so this is all based on racism.
Okay. Now let's go to the line real quick before we go to Attorney Banks. Producer, next caller. Let's take a call now.
Yes, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, sir. What's your question or comment for today?
Okay. Just need some help understanding the law. Well, let me say in my offset that I do believe that Derek Chauvin is guilty of killing George Floyd. But just normally, how can one person have 3 charges for the same crime? Is that like double, triple jeopardy, or are they trying to make one charge stick, or can he be guilty of all the 3 charges? And I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you.
I can answer that.
That's a very good question. Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very good question. There are different levels of homicide. Homicide is a very neutral term. Homicide is not a crime necessarily. Homicide is defined as the killing of one person by another. In a theater of war, when someone kills someone, they're not guilty. They can't be charged with a crime. The executioner who pulls the lever to release gas cannot be charged with a crime. It's a homicide. When you add the words, the killing of one person by another, which is homicide, with malice or forethought, that becomes murder. The term malice or forethought is done with malice, and you thought about it. The thought of killing that person turned over in your head for at least a split second. That becomes murder. Now, to answer your question, caller, there are several possibilities that Derek Chauvin can be convicted of. Murder, the killing of one person by another with malice of forethought. You got second-degree murder, and it all goes to a lesser state of mind. And then you got a form of manslaughter, that is criminal negligence. If you do something, you didn't intend to kill him, but you did something in such a reckless manner that you should have known the results would come about. For example, if I'm the ice cream vendor and I have an ice cream truck and I go very slowly down the street every day with my recording playing, it just draws out the kids to come out to get ice cream. Then one day I decide to go down the same street with my music playing, and instead of going at 10 miles an hour, I go at 70 miles an hour down the street and I kill a kid. Well, even though you didn't intend to kill him, you were so negligent and your actions were such that you knew the results were likely to come about. So it is with Derek Chauvin. He had his knee in the back and the neck of George Floyd, and he knew or should have known that the results were going to come about like they did. That's criminal negligence. So you can be guilty of all three. You can only be sentenced on the most serious, but you can be guilty of all three. And what the prosecution is doing is giving the jury an option. In case they don't find murder, they can find manslaughter or whatever else he's charged with. That's a very good question, and the purpose is to get a conviction to one of those crimes.
Well, thank you.
And we saw this week this playing out in the initial charging of Kim Potter, the police officer, in the case where a young 20-year-old Dante Wright was killed in Minnesota. She was initially, and a day after the incident, she was charged with second-degree manslaughter.
Yes.
And that is a floor. And based on the investigation and the evidence, that could be increased. That charge could be increased, as John has stated, from second degree to the criminal charges that John has just stated. She is the prosecution is stating at this point that her actions were so negligently reckless that they resulted in the death of young Dante Wright.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Vanita. And I think they brought those charges in that case in Minnesota, the Dante Wright case, so quickly because they wanted to quiet the masses. They could have taken time to quiet the masses, and they didn't want any violence. But you're right, Vanita. They could recharge her with murder, second-degree murder. But I think that the most they can get in this case is the manslaughter. It's criminal negligence. The female officer was negligent. I don't think they'll ever be able to prove she intended to kill the young man. And personally, and I'm a very liberal thinker, and I'm a civil rights lawyer, but personally, I think that she made a terrible mistake. The mistake was based in racism. A white person would have never escalated to the point where they had to use any type of force. But she saw, even in a light-skinned black man, she saw someone who was a threat. And all of her training went out the window. She lost her head, forgot what side her taser was on, and chose the wrong weapon. So, with body cam and everything else, I can't believe that she would intentionally take out her gun, claim it was or think it was or claimed it on film and on audio that it was a taser and shoot him with a gun. I think she truly just lost her mind and got confused, and it was all based on the fact that she was frightened because this black man was really a beast and not a human being. She was treated, I believe, I don't even know her, a white arrestee or detainee much different.
And I have a question.
Wait just 1 second. Let me take a couple callers and then we'll come back. Hold your thought. Okay, caller, producers, let's take one or two of the calls. We got a lot of calls holding. Go ahead.
Good morning, Nate, and your guests.
Good morning, sir. You have a question for us today?
Yes. Well, let me probably that in a comment. Nate, just so you remember, this is your world's greatest Uber driver, buddy, Ron.
Okay.
Just want to make sure you know who I am. Nate, the other night, let me preface it with this. Nate, there is racism in America. We live and play on an unlevel playing field. Now, I need to get that part out because I'm often told that's not how I believe. So I want to clarify that. There is racism in America. I do not believe that every single white person in America is racist. Otherwise, Obama would never have been president. It wasn't black people that voted him in. There are some white people who are not racist. But every now and then, I get the feeling that there's a picture being painted that America itself is racist. I don't believe that. And, Nate, let me tell you, I was pulled over twice this month by police officers. Mostly my fault because I was driving slightly erratic. You know, when you got coffee and you're fixing your coffee and you move one way to the left and one way to the right, the next thing you know, the lights go off. That happened to me in Brownsburg. The other night when the gentleman was out at FedEx doing that shooting, about midnight when I decided to go back out again, I got pulled over at about 46 in Shadeland. And I gave him a license. He came back. I told him what I was doing. My comment is this, Nate. Have you ever been pulled over by a police officer and not been shot? I've been pulled over twice. I don't believe that all police officers are bad. I know there certainly are some that are. I don't have any statistics to go around what I'm saying. However, in the last month, I've been pulled over twice, and here you and I are talking on the phone today. I don't believe that the problem is just police officers. I think every now and then life is a two-way street. Your behavior can sometimes depend on what happens. And
well, yes, let me respond to that. Let me respond to your comment. I've been doing this like in my 40th year, and I've represented my law firm represented over 400 law enforcement officials, police officers, state troopers, you name it. And so here's the situation. You're correct in the sense that not all police officers are racist. Nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing is absolute. So that's a given. But there are police officers who are racist or who cross the line. When I was a young lawyer, I was leaving a golf course and I was pulled over by a police officer. The first thing he did was take his gun out. And luckily I represented a police officer who was a captain. So I put him on speaker in my cell phone, and it was just kind of bizarre experience. it was a year in Indiana where the BMV did not send out the license plates on time, and they had a public announcement there was some catch. And so I paid for my tag back in May, but the plates was not received in July, by July 15th. And so he pulls over and he keeps me, and he takes his gun out. I'm thinking, what is this idiot doing? Well, in other words, I didn't get shot or anything, but I did file a complaint against the officer because I thought he used excessive force in terms of just investigating the license plate that was put on TV that the license plate wasn't sent out by the BMV. You write a ticket that get thrown out of court, and so the point I'm making to you is that regardless of what you think, there is a significant amount of police officers who still engage in misconduct. We're doing a better job here in our city now in terms of starting with our last police chief. We had a very good police chief that got rid of probably about 80% of the problems within the department. The current chief is still dealing with the issues, but the issue though is still prevalent, and that's my comment on that issue. Okay, now Attorney Banks, what were your comment?
I was going to ask in follow-up to these comments at John's and yours, Attorney Lee. Is it possible to train police officers to control their stress and fear in these situations? From a segment on Nightline this week, there was a example of training of police officers that's being conducted, which placed police officers in a lot of different scenarios and revealed that because of their stress and fear, what they perceived as a dangerous situation, or they may have perceived a gun in, for example, the suspect's hand, when the truth was there was no gun in the hand. And this goes back to the police officer in the tragedy that resulted in Dante Wright's death. So my question is,
you talking about the 13-year-old in Chicago?
Well, that's
is that the 13-year-old child? Okay.
That's Adam Toledo. That's an example. That's an example as well as the Dante Wright example. And I know, John, in National Bar Association boot camps and in the academy, you have where you've trained lawyers. I believe you've spoken of a case where you have a suspect, and now I've moved to the tragic situation in Chicago where we have the 13-year-old and we have the video footage that shows the 13-year-old has turned and his hands are up and there appears to be no gun in his hands. And I was wondering about your reaction to that.
Hey, before you respond, let me tell you something that's very important. I did a case up in Chicago and we did a trial on it. And they shot, and the police attempted to murder this guy. And essentially, the suspect sees a black vehicle come up, and he thinks it's game bangers. It's an unmarked car, and looked like a game car. So immediately, when it get close to him, he started running. And when he started running, the police officer started shooting at him. This is Chicago police, right? They shoot at a gas station and misses him. And this is all captured on video. And then when he heard the lights and sirens in the area, because when they announced it on the radio, they said, suspect shooting at police officer, right? So they announced on the radio, and so 50 cops is in the area within a minute or so. He's running away from what he think a gunbanger. And then all of a sudden we see the police light. He get down on the ground to surrender, thinking, okay, now these not gangbangers, the cop's gonna protect me. So he puts his hand up and the cops come in and shoots him. That is a true story. So what happened? Well, they found the gun about 100 feet away from where they shot the suspect. And because the suspect had a prior probation for a small quantity of marijuana, and the probation, instead of being about 6 months, ended up being about 6 years. This is the Chicago court system, right? And so the judge determined that because the police found a gun, that the suspect was armed, and therefore he's armed, the police had a right to shoot him. So it was a crazy stop, even though it was captured on video. So when I saw this 13-year-old being shot, the first thing I was thinking to myself, does the DNA shows that the suspect actually had that gun in his hand? Because as it turns out, Illinois got some strange laws in terms of recordation of police officers. You can't even record them. It's a strange law. They protect their cops. And I felt that the Chicago cop was some of the most corrupt in the country. And I said that even during the trial. These cops, I thought, just were corrupt, and we proved it. But the judge determined that because the suspect had a gun, that it was justifiable use of force. It's a crazy case. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No,
Well,
that's just an excellent example that you just described.
Yeah, commenting on Vanita's, what she was saying earlier about the training of police officers, they are trained very well. They go through an academy, they go through training in shoot, don't shoot situations, where, let's say, I remember the old FBI story movie with Jimmy Stewart at the Quantico, Virginia FBI training academy, where a young recruit is walk down a stage street, and a cardboard cutout will pop up of a robber with a gun, and they'll shoot it. And then they go a little further, and a cardboard cutout of a woman with some flowers in her hand pops up. You have to make a quick determination. They have those similar things in academies all over the country. I think it's what it is. I mean, so what I'm saying is that they are very well trained. And just by human nature, it's you have to make a snap decision, and sometimes it's the wrong decision. But I think fear is the thing that really causes these police shootings, either mistaken shootings based on fear, or the fact that they in their mind say that I'm going home, I will shoot first and ask questions later. So I think the solution to that is, and I've dedicated the last 20 years of my career, a 40-year career, to police excessive force cases, given this a whole lot of thought. I think that at least 80% of a police force in a minority community should be staffed by minorities, because they don't have the same fear. We don't have the same fear going to a concert, let's say, in the Black community, because we're used to it. We're not afraid of our people. So it is with policing. I think that if it's an African American community, 80% of the officers should be African American, and then there should be strict psychological testing of non-Black officers to see if they would be good candidates to patrol an African American community. Like, get to the bottom of it. Are they racist? Do they have racist tendencies? There are all kinds of tests they can use to determine that. And I see the same thing with the white community. I think that, or a Latino community, or an Ethiopian community, or Somalian, whatever. I think that a good majority of the officers should be of the same race as the people they are patrolling, because they don't have that fear. They understand. The unknown is the thing that causes fear. So this white officer in Minnesota, in the suburb of Minnesota, she feared, and she in her mind, I understand that there has been a tremendous gentrification in that city, that suburb of Minneapolis in the last 15 years, because a lot of Latinos, a lot of East Africans, and a lot of African Americans are moving into that community. And behind closed doors, they resent that, and they just don't understand their ways, and they're afraid. That's what happened with that woman who, I believe, that chose the taser the gun over the taser. So I think that's would be a tremendous first step to have officers of the same race patrol their community.
Hey, Attorney Banks, 1 minute closing comment.
Well, I'm looking forward to the closing arguments next week, although I believe they will be predictable. I think we can believe our eyes and we can believe our hearts, as it's been stated. The video is powerful evidence. This is really a very simple case. And I believe also that this is why we need to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There needs to be national standards regarding use of force, and there should be an emphasis on de-escalation and what that means. There should be the elimination of the qualified immunity defense, as well as no-knock warrants, as well as a national database, some of the elements contained in the components of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act.
Well, thank you, our callers, for calling in today. Thank you for our YouTube, our Facebook friends, and we thank you for supporting our show. We look forward to the verdict, and I'm hoping and praying that justice and accountability prevails in the courtroom in Minnesota. I hope and pray that the folks that are concerned about this issue in that town don't react to violence and things like that, that they continue to have peaceful protests. That's the American way, the First Amendment. Looting and rioting is not the First Amendment protection that we see. So thank you for listening, and God bless each one of you, and stay safe. Goodbye.